Pope Francis has appointed Stephen Brislin as Cardinal of the Catholic Church. In making that appointment, the Pope cited diversity as being indispensable to the future of the Catholic Church. Brislin, who's actually Bishop of Cape Town, will also play some kind of advisory role to the Pope. But what does this appointment or elevation mean for the Church of South Africa? Let's bring in Father Russell Pollard, who of course is a priest and director of the Jesuit Institute, joining us via our video link this morning. Father Pollard, it's great to see you. Thanks as always for making time. You know, people who I suppose understand the structure of the Catholic Church, I'm sure, are asking themselves whether this elevation means there's a chance, possibly, that the next Pope may come from South Africa.
Good evening, Ayanda, and good evening to all your viewers. Yes, indeed. I mean, that's what this does. And Brislin himself was put this question. They said to him, do you know that this now makes you a candidate to be Pope? And he said, yes, well, technically it does, but I don't feel I've got the global international experience in the languages that many of the other cardinals do have. But, of course, he could be elected as the next Pope, because he is part now of the College of Cardinals.
Yeah, and I suppose the next question they'll be asked is how, you know, the next Pope is elected, or how popes generally are elected. Typically, all we can do as the media is watch for, I think it's the white smoke that comes out of St. Peter's Square, announcing the fact that a Pope, in fact, has been elected. But how much do we know of the process itself?
Well, we know a lot about the process. So the cardinals would gather in Rome if the Pope dies or the Pope retires, as Pope Benedict did. They will meet for a few weeks, and they will look at the state of the church. They will analyze together. They will talk about the state of the church from the different corners of the world that they come. Because remember, these men are spread throughout the whole world. There's cardinals from 91 countries, I think I read today. And they will talk about the state of the church. And once they've done that, they then talk about what kind of leader is needed in the church at this time, given the state or the way we feel the church is. And then they will go in to vote. But before they do that as well, they would get to know each other. So amongst themselves, there'll be a sense of maybe this person might be able to lead at this time in this specific context and be able to address the needs of the church at this time. Then they'll go in and they will vote by secret ballot. And as you've just said, they will count the ballots, and there's got to be a majority. If there's no majority, they throw those ballots into the fire and black smoke comes out. When they do have a majority, then white smoke will come out of that chimney.
Absolutely. Speaking about the times that the church finds itself in, or, the kind of leader we need, what a time, in fact, to be at the helm of the Catholic Church, not only because of what's taking place in the world, but arguably what's taking place inside the church itself. Francis has been seen as a pope who kind of batted for the marginalized, the poor, and I suppose there's no surprises because he himself is from the global south as an Argentine-born pope. But I wonder to what extent you reckon he's had support, and I'm not in any way suggesting that this is the end of his time at the helm, but I imagine many people are taking stock of his legacy throughout his time in St. Peter's Square.
Indeed. I think, that's a very important question. So there's a number of things, Ayanda. I think the first thing that Francis has definitely been a pope that has tried to look towards the peripheries or the margins. He's been a great advocate for migrants and refugees, which has brought him into a lot of conflict with political leaders and people within the church itself. He has been an advocate as well for a church that is much more conversational, much more dialogical than hierarchical. A lot of people have not liked that either. He has made the church a real international church in the sense that the cardinals that he's appointed have come from parts of the world that no one ever thought would have a cardinal. So, for example, one of those who was appointed today comes from Mongolia, where there is a very, very small Catholic population. But his idea is that this body has to be as universal as possible, not dominated by the Northern Hemisphere or the West. And so he really has changed the flavor, so to speak, of the College of Cardinals, where the next Pope will come from. But the church is, as you say, embattled. I mean, I think there's this whole question of credibility around sex abuse that still hangs very much, over the head of the church, and in some cases is not being dealt with as it should be dealt with. I think there's a growing division between more conservative approaches in the church and Francis's more progressive approach. In some parts of the United States, for example, people are even talking about a split in the church. And I think as well that we've entered into a period of time where suddenly the church has lost its, has lost its sort of platform in the world. The church is no longer simply just given a platform because it is the church. People are asking questions. Secularism is growing. Religious belief in much of the Western world has declined. It's growing in Africa, and yet it's a very under-resourced church. So it's a very complicated institution to be the head of at the moment.
Yeah. Speaking about the future of the church, in fact, in making today's announcement, Pope Francis has been quoted as saying that diversity is indispensable for the future of the church. And I suppose this is a man who understands that the center in some ways may be shifted, right? You spoke about an under-resourced church growing in Africa as an example, and perhaps these kind of appointments are an acknowledgement of that. The question that comes up then is, do we know what lies on the other side of accepting that for the Catholic Church? I mean, so many of the traditions, even during Mass, for example, are borrowed from what life used to be like in the global north.
Indeed, and I think that's a kind of tension always within the church. So what Francis has done is he's recognized this, and he has definitely put his focus on the poorer church, also the church of the southern hemisphere. The church is growing in India, the church is growing in Africa, and the church is growing in South America. So it is clearly becoming a global South church, and hence a lot of these appointments. I think we're going to see, for example, and it started to happen already 20, 30 years ago. We're talking about enculturation, that instead of us just taking all these Western traditions and things and using them, we are now more and more saying, okay, how do we express faith in our places, at our time, in our context, in a way that says something about us and is not just simply something that has been imported. And I think in Africa we started to do that. It certainly has been happening. People are saying sort of African rituals and things are slowly being brought in, as were a number of these rituals that were from the Western world brought in. So that sort of enculturation is happening. But I think the key thing in this question of diversity is leadership, that this is the first pope that we've had from the Southern Hemisphere, Francis. And I think, looking at what's happening, the next pope surely has to come from another part of the Southern Hemisphere, whether it's India or Africa. And I think that's going to be the big thing. When we talk about diversity, are we willing to accept leaders in the church that are coming from the Southern Hemisphere? I think Francis has laid the ground for that to happen. And that'll impact the way that they see the Western world and how they might choose to work within the framework of the Western world and the Western church.
Fascinating. I wonder how much influence Stephen Brislin is likely to have. I mean, we're told he's going to play some kind of advisory role to the Pope as well. I mean, is it fair to really put all our hopes on this one man, this mere mortal? Or, is there a real chance that, he might have a very audible voice at that level?
I think he will have an audible voice. And I say this for two reasons. I'd say this because we don't have a lot of cardinals on this continent. So the African cardinals, which are not a majority, I think the Pope would listen to them. Especially Francis, I think that he would definitely listen. So I think in terms of having access to the Pope and bringing their issues there, there's going to be a space for them to do that. One doesn't want to pin all your hopes on one person, but I think as well that bringing the needs and especially being able to point to a lot of the difficulties that people face in Africa by people like Brislin is going to also make Rome more aware of what is really going on here. And Archbishop Brislin, Cardinal Brislin now, is involved in a number of different initiatives around the world. So one of them is, for a number of years, he's been working with a group that is looking at peace in the Holy Land between Palestine and Israel and so forth. And he's quite well known for his work there. So I think he already has a profile, and maybe that's why he was noticed by the Pope. And interestingly, Francis never consulted anybody when he chose this specific group of cardinals that Brislin was amongst. So one would think that maybe, Brislin has a fair chance if he's willing and able to make sure that the Pope hears what he has to hear, and not just the Pope, but all the other cardinals, the leadership of the Catholic Church. So I think he will be listened to, and I think he will have something to offer, and I think most especially that he will bring the issues, the poverty, the political issues of Southern Africa to the attention of the Pope. And who knows, we may even be moving towards a visit now from a Pope that Brislin is a cardinal.
Absolutely. Look, no matter where you stand with issues of faith, there's no overstating the importance of religious institutions like the church. And with that in mind, hopefully this all works out. Father Russell Pollard, always a great pleasure speaking to you. Thank you very much indeed for your time.